I came home early for our anniversary. My wife was alone at the kitchen table, sobbing. My brother was in the living room, toasting with her friends. I opened my phone and found what I already suspected. The apartment he'd been renting for a year was in her name and paid from our account. I didn't raise my voice, but what I did made him regret it. I came home early that evening with a bottle of Bordeaux, a 7-year-old receipt from the restaurant where we had our first date, and a reservation at the same table. That was the kind of husband I was. The kind who remembers. The kind who keeps receipts, metaphorically speaking. And, as it turned out, literally. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm 57 years old. I spent 31 years building a financial consulting firm in Nashville, Tennessee. From a one-room office above a dry cleaner on Charlotte Avenue to a company with 14 employees and clients across 4 states. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you so you understand exactly what was at stake and exactly how much they took. My wife's name was Diane, 22 years of marriage, 2 dogs, 1 grown daughter in college, a mortgage we'd almost paid off, and what I genuinely believed was a good life. Not a perfect life, a real one. The kind with arguments about the thermostat and cold coffee and somebody always forgetting to buy dish soap. I loved that life. God help me, I loved every boring inch of it. And my brother, Raymond Calloway, 54 years old, chronically unemployed, chronically charming, and the only family I had left after our parents passed. I paid for Ray's first apartment when he was 38, and, between opportunities, I co-signed his truck loan in 2019. I flew to Phoenix to help him move when his 3rd marriage collapsed. I did all of it without complaint because he was my brother, and I was raised to believe that meant something. I was apparently the only one who got that memo. Now, October. Nashville. The leaves on the trees along our street were just starting to turn. That particular shade of orange that makes Tennessee look like a painting someone couldn't decide whether to finish. I remember noticing that on the drive home. I remember thinking, this is a good night. I'd left the office 3 hours early, told my assistant Lynn to hold my calls, stopped at the wine shop on Belmont, picked up the Bordeaux, and drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in a while. Hopeful. That's the word that's going to haunt me for the rest of this story. I pulled into the driveway at 4:47 p.m. Diane's car was there. Good. The house lights were on downstairs. Also good. I grabbed the wine, grabbed the little wrapped gift I'd been hiding in my glove compartment for 2 weeks. A first edition copy of the Steinbeck novel she'd mentioned wanting back in 2021. Mentioned once, casually, and assumed I hadn't heard, and I walked up to my own front door smiling like an idiot. I heard voices before I even touched the handle. Laughter, actually. The kind that stops being funny the second you realize you're not in on the joke. I opened the door. The living room was to my left. To my right, past the entryway, was the kitchen. I looked right first. Diane was sitting at the kitchen table, alone. Her back was to me, but I could see her shoulders, the way they were pulled in tight, the way her whole body looked like something collapsing in slow motion. She was crying, not crying. I took 1 step toward her. Then I looked left. Ray was standing in my living room, holding a glass of champagne, my champagne, from the rack I kept in the dining room, surrounded by 3 of Diane's closest friends. Brenda, Carol, and a woman named Faye, who I'd always thought had the warmest smile in any room she entered. They were toasting. On my coffee table, there was a cake, white frosting, and written across the top, in blue icing, were the words, "To fresh starts, fresh starts." I stood in my own doorway, holding a bottle of wine and a Steinbeck novel, for a woman who had apparently already started something fresh without consulting me. Nobody in the living room saw me immediately. Ray had his back half-turned. Carol was laughing at something. Faye was cutting the cake. Diane must have heard the door, because she turned, and the look on her face. I've thought about that look every single day since. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was the look of someone who has been running a very complicated race and has just realized the finish line moved. She said, "You're early." Not, "Hi, honey." Not, "Happy anniversary." Not even a scramble for an excuse. Just, "You're early." As if arriving on my own anniversary at a normal human hour was the problem. I looked at her for a moment. I looked at Ray in the living room, who had now turned around and whose champagne glass had gone very, very still. I said, "Looks like it." And I walked to my office. I don't know what they expected me to do. Maybe they thought I'd ask questions. Maybe they thought I'd walk in confused and Ray would clap me on the shoulder and somebody would say, "Surprise," and there'd be some explanation that made all of this make sense. There was no explanation. I knew that before I sat down. Because here's the thing about being a financial consultant for 31 years. You notice patterns. You notice when things don't add up. And for the past several months, several things had not been adding up. A recurring charge on our joint account. $2,200 a month, showing up under the label Wellstone Management Services. I'd asked Diane about it back in August. She said it was a property management subscription service she'd signed up for, something related to a real estate course she was taking online. I remember thinking, Diane's never expressed any interest in real estate in 22 years of marriage, but okay. I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. I opened my laptop, pulled up the account, found the Wellstone charge. Then I did what I should have done in August. I searched it. Wellstone Management Services was not a subscription service. It was not a real estate course platform. It was a property management company based in East Nashville that handled leases for residential apartments. My hands were steady. 31 years in finance. You learn to stay steady when the numbers are telling you something terrible. I called the company's main number, put on my most pleasant professional voice, said I was inquiring about a property under management, and gave them the account reference number from our bank statement. The woman on the other end pulled it up in seconds. 1-bedroom apartment, East Side. Lease start date, 11 months ago. Tenant name, Raymond Calloway. The lease cosigner, Diane Calloway. The funding account, mine. I sat with that information for probably 45 seconds, maybe longer. The sounds from the living room filtered down the hallway. Ray's laugh, the clink of glasses. Faye saying something that made Carol shriek with delight. They were celebrating, in my house, with my champagne, on my anniversary, after spending 11 months paying for my brother's apartment out of my account. I did the math, without thinking about it. 22 months of payments at $2,200. That was north of $48,000. $48,000. Gone. For Ray, who told me last Thanksgiving, with his hand on my shoulder and genuine-looking tears in his eyes, that he was finally getting his life together. Who said he'd found a place on his own? Who said, and I will never forget this sentence as long as I live, "Rick, you've done enough for me." It's time I stood on my own 2 feet. Standing on his own 2 feet, 30 miles away, in an apartment I was paying for. I closed the laptop. I looked at the wall of my office for a long moment. On that wall, there's a framed photo. Me and Ray at my daughter's high school graduation. His arm around me, both of us grinning. I kept thinking, how long did they think this could go on before I found it? And then, the worst question followed, right behind it. Quiet and cold. What else haven't I found yet? I stood up, walked to my office door, stood there listening to the sounds of the party in my living room. Ray's voice, Diane's friends, the occasional burst of laughter. I thought about going out there. I thought about walking into that living room, setting the wine bottle down on the coffee table, and saying exactly what was in my head. Instead, I walked back to my desk, sat down, opened a different account, and I started moving money. The night of the anniversary, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office until 3 in the morning moving assets, documenting transactions, and building a timeline that made me physically sick to look at. Diane knocked on my door around 11, voice shaky, asking if I wanted to talk. I said I was working on a client emergency. She went to bed. Ray left around midnight. I heard him say goodbye to the women, heard his truck start in the driveway, heard him drive away from my house after drinking my champagne and celebrating whatever fresh start they'd all decided I wasn't invited to. 11 months, $48,000, and he drove away like it was just another Tuesday. By sunrise, I had a clearer picture, and it was worse than I'd thought. The apartment was just the beginning. See, when you've spent 3 decades in finance, you develop certain instincts. You learn to follow money the way a bloodhound follows a scent. And once I started looking, really looking, the trail went places I never expected. The Wellstone payments were the most obvious, but buried underneath them were dozens of smaller charges. A furniture store in Franklin, electronics retailer online, an auto insurance policy that wasn't attached to any vehicle I recognized. Gas station charges in parts of Nashville I never visited. All of it flowing out of our joint account. All of it disguised under labels Diane had manually renamed in our banking app. Wellness subscription, home maintenance, auto service plan. She'd been editing the transaction descriptions for almost a year, turning theft into something that looked like normal life. I pulled the insurance policy details. The vehicle it covered was a 2022 Ford F-150, Ray's truck. The same truck I'd co-signed the loan for in 2019. The same truck he swore he was making payments on himself. Apparently Diane had been covering his insurance for 8 months. $340 a month. I made a list. I'm a list person. Always have been. Apartment rent, $2,200 monthly. Total over 11 months, $24,200. Furniture and electronics, approximately $8,400. Auto insurance, $2,720. Miscellaneous charges I could trace directly to Ray's lifestyle, another $6,100. And then I found the big one. A wire transfer from 6 months ago, $15,000, sent to an account I didn't recognize. The memo line read, Investment, RC. I traced the receiving account. It belonged to something called Volunteer Ventures, LLC. A quick search told me everything I needed to know. Volunteer Ventures was a limited liability company registered in Tennessee, filed 7 months ago. Registered agent, Raymond Calloway. My brother had used my money to start a business. The business, as far as I could tell from the sparse paperwork filed with the state, was some kind of lifestyle brand. Clothing, accessories. The website wasn't even finished yet. Just a landing page with a stock photo of a mountain and the words, Coming soon, in a font that probably cost $200 to license. $15,000. For a website with a stock photo. Total damage, as of that morning, just over $56,000. $56,000 stolen from my account by my wife and given to my brother to fund an apartment, a truck, and a business that didn't exist. And the kicker, the absolute kicker, I pulled up Ray's social media. I don't use that stuff much myself, but I know how to navigate it when I need to. His Instagram was public, and there he was, posting 3 times a week for the past year about his entrepreneurial journey. Photos of him at coffee shops with a laptop, photos of the Nashville skyline from what I now recognized as his apartment balcony. Inspirational quotes about building your empire and betting on yourself. One post from 4 months ago showed him holding up a whiskey glass with the caption, "When you finally stop waiting for permission and start creating your own opportunities." Creating his own opportunities with my money, while posting about it publicly for anyone to see. I screenshot everything. Then I called my attorney. Gerald Whitmore has been my lawyer for 19 years. He handled my business incorporation my estate planning, and the one lawsuit I dealt with back in 2015 when a former employee tried to claim wrongful termination. Gerald is 63 years old, built like a former linebacker, going soft around the middle, and has the moral flexibility of a rubber band when it comes to protecting his clients. I called him at 7 in the morning. "Gerald, I need a meeting. Today. Bring everything you have on Tennessee divorce law and marital asset protection." Silence on the other end. "Richard, it's 7 a.m. I'm aware." More silence. "I'll clear my morning." We met at his office downtown at 9. I brought the laptop, the screenshots, the transaction records, and the list I'd made at 3 in the morning with coffee shaky hands. Gerald looked at all of it for about 15 minutes without speaking. Then he took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said something I'll never forget. "Rick, this isn't just grounds for divorce. This is fraud." I nodded. "Your wife co-signed a lease using your joint funds without your knowledge or consent. She systematically disguised transactions to hide the theft, and your brother has been the direct beneficiary of what amounts to embezzlement from your marital accounts." "I know. You could press charges." I thought about that. I really did. Ray in handcuffs. Diane in handcuffs. The whole ugly mess playing out in a courtroom. "Not yet," I said. "First, I want to understand the full scope. Then, I want to protect what's left. Then, I want them to understand exactly what they've done." Gerald smiled. Not a happy smile. The smile of a man who's about to enjoy his work. "Then, let's get started." Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner with Diane and made small talk about her day. I called Ray twice. "Just to check in," I said. Just being a good brother. Underneath, I was dismantling everything they'd built. Gerald helped me separate our finances in ways Diane wouldn't immediately notice. The joint account stayed active, but I quietly moved the bulk of our liquid assets into accounts solely in my name. "Legal," Gerald assured me. "In Tennessee, funds I earned were still my property until a divorce decree said otherwise." I also hired someone, a forensic accountant named Patricia Odom, who specialized in what she politely called marital financial irregularities. Patricia was 58, wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and had the demeanor of a librarian who'd seen too much. She dug deeper than I had, and she found worse. The lifestyle brand wasn't Ray's only project, it turned out. Volunteer Ventures had a subsidiary. Another LLC filed 2 months after the first. This one was called Fresh Horizons Consulting. The registered agent on Fresh Horizons wasn't Ray. It was Diane. My wife had a business, with my brother, that I knew nothing about. Patricia traced the money. Another wire transfer, this one from 3 months ago. $8,000, sent from a different account I hadn't known existed. An account Diane had opened at a regional bank, using her maiden name. The deposits into that account? Regular transfers from our joint checking, small amounts. 200 here, 300 there. Never enough to trigger any alerts. Always disguised as something mundane. "She's been siphoning for over a year," Patricia said, sliding a spreadsheet across her desk. "Small amounts that add up. My current total is somewhere around $12,000 in that secondary account alone. 12,000 more, on top of the $68,000. I sat with that number for a long time. "There's something else," Patricia said. I looked up. The Fresh Horizons account has some interesting activity. Regular payments to a property management company. Wellstone? Different one. This company manages short-term rentals, vacation properties. I felt something cold settle into my chest. "They're planning to buy something," Patricia continued. "Based on the payment pattern, it looks like they've put down a deposit on a rental property in Gatlinburg. Mountain cabin. The paperwork isn't finalized yet, but the intent is clear. A cabin in the mountains, bought with my money, for a business my wife and brother were building behind my back. That night, I went home and sat across from Diane at dinner and listened to her talk about her book club and her yoga class and how she was thinking about repainting the guest bathroom. I nodded in all the right places. Inside, I was ice. How do you sit across from someone for 22 years and not know them at all? How do you build a life with a person who's been building something else entirely? I started paying closer attention after that, not just to the money, to Diane herself. The way she checked her phone constantly, the way she'd leave the room to take certain calls, the way she'd become vague about her schedule in ways she never had before. Where were you this afternoon? Oh, just running errands. You know how it is. I do know how it is. That's exactly the problem. I installed a camera in the kitchen, small, wireless, hidden behind the cookbooks on the shelf above the stove. Legal in Tennessee, as long as I owned the property, which I did. 3 days later, I watched Ray walk into my house at 2 in the afternoon. Diane greeted him with a hug that lasted slightly too long. They sat at my kitchen table, drank coffee from my mugs, and talked about their plans. The cabin was almost finalized, Ray said. Another $20,000 and they'd have enough for the down payment. He was thinking they could start renting it out by spring, build some cash flow, eventually buy another one. Rick won't notice, Diane said. He never looks that closely at the accounts. She actually said those words. Sitting in my kitchen, in my house, wearing the anniversary earrings I'd bought her 3 years ago. Ray laughed. The man's clueless. Always has been. Remember when Dad used to say, Rick got all the work ethic and I got all the brains. Your father was an alcoholic, Ray. Doesn't mean he was wrong. They both laughed. I watched that clip 4 times before I trusted myself to breathe normally. All the brains. The man living in an apartment I pay for, driving a truck I insured, building a business with money I earned. He thinks he got all the brains. Something shifted in me that night. Something that had been holding on to hope finally let go. I called Gerald the next morning. I want to move faster. How fast? I want them out of my life by Christmas. Gerald paused. That's 6 weeks away, Rick. I know. Is it possible? Another pause. It's possible, but it won't be clean, and it won't be quiet. I thought about Ray's smug laugh on that kitchen recording. I thought about Diane saying my name like it was a joke. Good, I said. I don't want it to be quiet. Then, Gerald's voice had that edge again, that enjoying his work edge. Let's talk about the vow renewal. I'd almost forgotten. The anniversary party, the fresh start celebration I'd walked in on. What about it? You mentioned they were toasting something, celebrating something. You said there was a cake. To fresh starts. I've been thinking about that. What if we gave them a fresh start they weren't expecting? I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. Diane's been pushing for some kind of recommitment ceremony, hasn't she? Mentioned it a few times over the past year. She had, actually. I'd brushed it off as sentimental. Now I understood it differently. She wanted a public display. Something to point to later. Proof that we were solid while she was hollowing out our life from the inside. What are you suggesting, Gerald? I'm suggesting you give her exactly what she wants. A party, a ceremony, all your friends, all her family. Your brother, of course. And then? Gerald smiled. And then, you give a speech. The plan took shape over the next 2 weeks. I told Diane I'd been thinking about us, about how we'd drifted, about how I wanted to recommit. I said it with as much sincerity as I could manufacture, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and finally relief. She thinks she's gotten away with it. She thinks this is her victory lap. I want to throw a party, I said. Invite everyone. Your parents, your sister, our friends, Ray, of course. Make it a real celebration. Diane's eyes went briefly to her phone, then back to me. "That sounds wonderful, honey." Honey! She called me honey while planning to steal another $20,000. I booked the venue, a restaurant in the Gulch, with a private room and a sound system. I sent the invitations personally, and I prepared my speech. The party was set for December 18th, 3 days before Christmas. Everyone I needed in one room. Every truth I'd uncovered, ready to be spoken. The only question left was how much of myself I'd have left when it was over. December 18th arrived cold and clear. Nashville had that particular winter bite that cuts right through your coat. The kind of cold that makes your breath visible and your thoughts sharp. I stood at the bathroom mirror that morning, adjusting my tie, and barely recognized the man looking back at me. $68,000, 11 months of lies, 22 years of marriage, built on something I'm only now seeing clearly. Diane was downstairs, humming to herself while she got ready. She'd bought a new dress for the occasion. Navy blue, elegant, expensive. I knew exactly how expensive, because I'd seen the charge come through on the account I was still monitoring. $412. For a dress to wear to a party celebrating a marriage she'd been robbing blind. The audacity. I drove us to the restaurant separately, told her I had to stop by the office first to handle a client emergency. She didn't question it. She never questioned my work excuses. That was the thing about being reliable for 3 decades. People stopped doubting you. They also stopped paying attention. The venue was perfect. Private room at the back of the restaurant, seating for 40. A small stage area with a microphone, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. I'd worked with the manager to set everything up precisely how I wanted it, including the projection screen. Guests started arriving around 7. Diane's parents, Howard and Marlene, came first. Howard shook my hand with that firm grip he'd always been proud of. Marlene kissed my cheek and told me I looked handsome. These people raised a thief, but I don't think they know that yet. Diane's sister Evelyn arrived next. Evelyn was different from Diane, always had been. She'd married a good man, raised 3 kids, and never once asked me for anything. When I'd offered to help with her oldest son's college tuition 3 years ago, she'd actually cried and insisted on a repayment plan. She was the only one in that family who'd ever treated my generosity like it meant something. I'd already decided Evelyn would be protected from what was coming. The friends filtered in. Brenda, Carol, Faye, the champagne conspirators from the anniversary. They greeted me with hugs and smiles that made my skin crawl. You knew. All of you knew what was happening, and you celebrated it in my living room. And then Ray arrived. He walked in like he owned the place. New jacket, new watch, hair freshly cut. The confidence of a man who'd figured out how to live well without working for any of it. He hugged Diane first, held on a beat too long, same as always. Then he walked over to me, hand extended, grin wide. "Big brother, hell of a party you're throwing." I shook his hand. Figured it was time. 22 years, man. That's something worth celebrating. You're celebrating with my money, in clothes I paid for, after spending a year bleeding me dry. It certainly is, I said. The evening proceeded normally for the first hour. Drinks, appetizers, small talk. I worked the room like I'd worked every business function for 3 decades. Smile, handshake, remember the names, ask about the kids. Meanwhile, I watched. Diane laughed too loudly at Ray's jokes. I watched her friends exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I watched Ray check his phone repeatedly, probably texting whatever woman he was currently lying to about his fake career and fake apartment. At 8:15, the restaurant manager gave me the signal. I walked to the small stage, picked up the microphone, cleared my throat. The room quieted. "First of all," I said, "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. 22 years of marriage is a milestone worth acknowledging." Diane beamed from the front row. Her mother squeezed her hand. I've been thinking a lot lately about what marriage means, about trust, about partnership, about the vows we make, and whether we actually keep them. A few people nodded. Ray was already reaching for another drink. I've also been thinking about family, about what it means to have people in your life who are supposed to have your back, who are supposed to look out for you. I paused. Let the silence stretch. So tonight, I want to share something with all of you, something I think you deserve to know. I pulled the small remote from my pocket, pressed the button. The projection screen behind me flickered to life. First image, the Wellstone lease agreement. Ray's name as tenant, Diane's name as co-signer, my account number as the payment source. The room went very quiet. This is a lease for an apartment in East Nashville, I said. My brother Ray has been living there for 11 months. My wife co-signed it without my knowledge. The rent has been paid from our joint account, the account I fund entirely with my income. Diane's face went white. Ray's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. $24,200, I continued, just for the rent. I clicked to the next slide. Transaction records, the furniture purchases, the electronics, the insurance payments. Another $11,000 in furnishings and related expenses, all taken from accounts I earned and my wife accessed without my consent. Howard, Diane's father, was staring at his daughter with an expression I'd never seen before. Confusion, becoming realization, becoming something that looked a lot like shame. But wait, I said. There's more. Click. The Volunteer Ventures LLC paperwork. Ray's name as registered agent. The $15,000 wire transfer. My brother started a business, a lifestyle brand, very entrepreneurial. The startup capital came from my accounts. $15,000. Ray stood up. Rick, listen. Sit down, Ray. Something in my voice made him sit. Click. Fresh Horizons Consulting. Diane's name as registered agent. The partnership documents. But it wasn't just my brother's business. It was a partnership. My wife and my brother. Building something together. With my money. While telling me nothing. Diane was crying now. Not the guilty crying from the anniversary. Real tears. Tears of someone watching everything collapse. Good. Now you know how it feels. Click. The secret bank account. The siphoned funds. The $12,000 Diane had squirreled away under her maiden name. Over the past 14 months, my wife has been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into a private account I knew nothing about. Small amounts, never enough to trigger suspicion. Total, $12,000. Marlene had her hand over her mouth. Carol looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Click. The cabin in Gatlinburg. The property listing. The deposit receipts. The plan, as best I can tell, was to purchase a rental property in the mountains, a vacation cabin. They needed another $20,000 for the down payment. They were going to take that from me too. I set down the remote. Total stolen, $68,000. Over the course of 14 months. By my wife and my brother, while I worked 60-hour weeks building a business to support our family. The room was absolutely silent. I looked at Ray. You told me last Thanksgiving that you were standing on your own 2 feet. You said I'd done enough for you. You had tears in your eyes when you said it. Ray's jaw was tight. No clever response now. You posted on Instagram about creating your own opportunities. About betting on yourself. You did that while living in an apartment I paid for, driving a truck I insured, building a business with money I earned. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out an envelope, walked over to Ray, and placed it in his hands. That's a 30-day eviction notice for the apartment. The lease is being terminated for fraud. You have until January 17th to vacate. Ray looked at the envelope like it might bite him. You can't. I already have. My attorney filed the paperwork yesterday. The property management company has been notified. Your utilities will be shut off on the 18th. I turned to Diane. And this is for you. I pulled out a second envelope, walked to the front row, placed it in her shaking hands. Divorce papers, already filed. You'll be hearing from my attorney about the division of assets, but I'll give you the preview. I've documented every fraudulent transaction, every disguised charge, every dollar you stole. In Tennessee, marital misconduct affects property division, and fraud affects it substantially. Diane opened the envelope, stared at the paperwork. Her tears were flowing freely now. Rick, please, I can explain. No, I said, you can't. I turned back to the room. I have one more thing. I walked to where Evelyn was sitting. She was the only one in Diane's family who looked more sad than shocked, like she'd suspected something, but hoped she was wrong. I crouched down beside her. Evelyn, you have always been kind to me. You've always treated me with respect. You've never asked for anything you weren't willing to repay. I pulled out a third envelope, smaller, placed it in her hands. Your son's remaining student loans, $43,000. I paid them off this morning. You don't owe me anything. You never did. Evelyn started crying, not guilty tears, grateful ones. She hugged me so hard, I thought she might crack a rib. Thank you, she whispered. Rick, thank you. I stood up. Now, if you'll all excuse me. I walked toward the door. Rick. Diane's voice, desperate. Rick, please, where are you going? I stopped, turned. I'm going home, my home, one I'll be keeping in the divorce. The one your name was never on because your credit was destroyed when we met, and I was foolish enough to think that meant you needed my help. I looked at her for a long moment. Happy anniversary, Diane. I walked out of the restaurant into the December cold. The Nashville skyline glittered against the dark sky. Somewhere behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting. Diane sobbing, Howard shouting, Ray trying to explain himself to a room that had stopped listening. I got in my car, started the engine, let the heater run for a minute while I sat in the silence. 22 years, $68,000, one brother, one wife, all of it built on lies. My phone buzzed. Text from Gerald. How did it go? I typed back. Exactly as planned. 3 dots appeared. Then, the LLC dissolution paperwork will be filed Monday. The fraud complaint goes to the DA's office Tuesday. Rest up this weekend. The real work starts next week. I set the phone down, looked at the restaurant one more time. Then, I drove home. 6 months later, I stood in my new apartment. Smaller than the house, quieter. Just enough space for one person and the occasional visit from my daughter, who'd called me crying the night after the party and said she was proud of me. The divorce was finalized in April. Diane got significantly less than she'd expected. The documented fraud had consequences. Gerald made sure of that. Ray was evicted on schedule. Last I heard, he was sleeping on a friend's couch in Murfreesboro. His lifestyle brand dissolved before it ever launched. The DA's office declined to prosecute, said it was a civil matter, but the fraud documentation I'd built was enough to destroy his credit for years. Brenda, Carol, and Faye all had interesting conversations with their husbands after I sent each of them a detailed summary of their involvement. 2 of those marriages are now in counseling. The third ended. Consequences. They ripple outward. I started volunteering at a financial literacy nonprofit downtown, teaching foster kids how to manage money, how to recognize when someone's trying to take advantage of them, how to protect themselves. The first lesson I always taught, trust, but verify. One evening, about 2 months after the divorce was final, I was cleaning out the last of my things from the old house. In the back of my closet, I found a box I'd forgotten about. Inside, the Steinbeck First Edition, still wrapped, the one I'd bought for our anniversary. I held it for a long moment, then I donated it to the public library. Some gifts aren't meant to be given, and some people aren't worth giving them to. I locked up the house for the last time, handed the keys to the realtor, walked away without looking back. 22 years. One lesson. The people who should protect you are sometimes the ones you need protection from. The Nashville skyline stretched out ahead of me as I drove toward my new life. Smaller, quieter, but finally, completely mine.